LIVEcast, welcome to the LIVEcast, LIVEcast, welcome to the show. LIVEcast, welcome to the LIVEcast, welcome to the show.
Hey,
hello
welcome to the show.
Where are we looking?
Over there.
Hello. Brilliant. Well, I'm Glen.
I'm Paul.
And together we are the LIVEcast.
Glen and Paul.
Yeah, and we're back live as well. So we have been out of our offices for the last
Do we want
month.
this on directional or surround?
We want it on directional.
You sure?
Yes.
Okay, right.
Perhaps if you've got a view on this at home, we'd love to hear your thoughts on how to use our software and our USB microphone. I think unidirectional is the way forward. But that's not why you tune in. You tune in for incisive commentary on evangelism and theology and reaching your friends for Jesus.
Yeah.
But we've
That's
been
what you tune in for. Whether you get that is another story.
And you're constantly disappointed. So yes, we've been out of these offices for a month.
Yeah.
And they have been demolishing them around us.
It's gone quite quickly though.
Yeah.
It feels quick to me, but then I'm normally only here 2 days a week anyway, so
Yeah.
if you've been in the other office for 5 days a week, you probably have felt it more keenly than I have.
We've been crammed into a little room in a church nearby in Eastbourne, and Holy Trinity have hosted us, and thank you very much for Holy Trinity. But we're very glad to be starting to move back here. And the next big job is our studio space, which is a massive, wonderful, echoing, booming chamber that we've now got to soundproof and make it acoustically kind of dead. It's a live room.
Very much live at the moment.
Very live.
Yes. But this, and so where we are now, we're in what was our office space, and it will be our office space again. Mm-hmm. But it's been recarpeted and repainted, and electric's done and tucked away nicely and painted and whatnot.
And we've got a dishwasher.
Yes. All these things. So at the moment, though, we're basically sitting in the middle of an empty room.
Yeah. But the work of Speak Live continues, and perhaps you saw last night that we published an interview between myself and Sharon Dirckx, and Dirckx rhymes with lyrics.
Yes,
so
I got that on her interview. She said that.
Yes, Dirckx rhymes with lyrics, and she's written this great little book called "Am I Just My Brain?" all about reductive physicalism.
Something I'm very familiar with. Yeah.
But it is essentially the view that I am simply my brain, and there's nothing to my mind beyond my neurons kind of fizzing together and my synapses firing. And we just had a chat about neuroscience and brain scanning, as well as philosophical issues, as well as issues to do with consciousness, and actually how Christianity best explains what we take to be most natural to us. What we most naturally take is that my mind is giving me an experience of the world that is not reducible just to quarks and leptons fizzing together, but that actually I have a first-person narrative experience of this world, and therefore actually what Christians are saying, and what Christians have always been saying for thousands of years, actually makes best sense of ourselves and the scientific data. And I enjoyed my chat. And where we got to on the chat, though, at the end, we're going to see a clip from the very end of the interview. Is this idea that in science, looking at the world as a machine is an increasingly narrow and limited way of seeing the world. And that actually Newtonian physics, which just says, force equals mass times acceleration, and what you can see, and basically reality is like billiard balls bumping into each other. That was helpful in getting the scientific enterprise off the ground. But the more we're learning about the world, the more we're seeing that actually that mechanical view of nature is of limited importance, and that actually more and more we're seeing that reality is to do with information. And it's to do with consciousness, so that even in quantum physics, people are talking about information and space and time is emergent just from information. Really, really interesting kinds of things. Or even in biology, they're talking about DNA. you just have a snooze for the next 30 seconds.
Yeah,
Paul.
I'll see you at the end, guys.
I'll bring you back in once I talk about, I don't know,
Avengers. or
Rage
something.
Against the Machine. I don't know.
Rage Against the Machine.
You
We've
guitarist.
gone back to the 90s all of a sudden.
But yeah, so in biology also, it seems to be all about DNA. Well, isn't that interesting that it all boils down to language? And in neuroscience, it seems like theories of mind cannot simply be reduced to brain chemistry. And so there's a real turn in the scientific community, in the realm of physics and biology and neuroscience, a turn away from a mechanical view of the world towards a more organic view of the world, and a view of the world that is dependent on information and consciousness. So that's where we get to in my conversation with Sharon Dirckx. And what it led me to thinking about is prayer. And so that might be a new idea for you. How do you get from neuroscience to prayer? Paul is about to find out.
Yeah.
So we'll have a look at this bit of the interview, and then we'll have a look at actually how that mechanical view of the world really kills your prayer life, and another 9 killers to your prayer life, and how we from the Bible might fight against that. But first, let's have a look at this interview with Sharon Dirckx. Not only your science, but also your Christian experience of prayer, your Christian experience of faith. The fact that we are not simply our brains, how's that going to help you, Sharon? How's that going to help us as Christians to walk out into the world?
Well, I think that, firstly, to say that there's so much more to me than just the physical. There's so much more to life than just the physical. There's more than you can see with your eyes. And therefore, there are many things to this world and to the inner world that we ourselves have that are important and that should be attended to. And, earlier chapters talk about us having a soul. You can either feed your soul or you can starve it. But actually, we are most whole when we integrate all of these different areas. It also means that the mind is something to be used. To be a Christian isn't to cease to be a thinking person. Actually, the mind is a really important part of you. That the deepest expression of what it means to be human is to use your mind, or one of the deepest, anyway. And I think ultimately what this all points us to is that, perhaps this inner capacity, this capacity to relate not only to ourselves, not only to the physical world, but potentially to beyond that, means that there's a God out there that wants to know me, that wants to relate to me, and that although we can understand the machinery, a bit like the workings, the inner mechanics of a radio, very well using neuroscience, that doesn't mean there isn't someone out there broadcasting that might actually want to relate and talk, and that these faculties exist because God has given us them to know Him and to relate to Him. And so this is, an encouragement to seek God, to ask Him if He's real, to make Himself known, and to engage with Him, to pour out our heart to Him, and to actually, to really pursue relationship with God.
Yes, you use the analogy of the brain being more like an antenna to pick up a signal from beyond that is not a purely physical thing. And of course, what are we doing here? We are two conscious beings having a rational, in your case very rational, in my case somewhat less rational discussion, using language and emotion and rhetoric and reason and all these things. And what do you notice about all these things? They're totally immaterial. And I've always been struck by Keith Ward sort of saying what is closest to me is an immaterial thing called my consciousness, which nobody can have a mechanical view of. And it seems like the most obvious fact about ourselves and about our world is actually a conscious immaterial reality. That's quite suggestive, isn't it?
Absolutely. Yes.
And even as a Christian, it's helped me just to think this week as I've read the book about prayer, and just I think so much of my prayer life suffers at the hands of a mechanical view of the world, and I think everything just grinds along according to iron laws of physics. So why pray? But what if consciousness is far deeper? What if the mind of God and my mind in communion is a more powerful thing than all the mechanics of the universe?
Yeah.
That'll get you praying, maybe.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So thank you for writing this book, and I think it's helped me. As I said, it's helped me to to pray. It's helped me to think about the world in a more Christian way. And I think it'll help lots of Christians get on the front foot on this question of neuroscience and consciousness, because I think the evidence is on our side. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. So people get Am I Just My Brain by Sharon Dirckx. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Glen.
Here we are, back again.
With the Renegade Master.
Now he's talking about 90s.
In my prime here.
Yeah.
So, yeah, great little book. Am I Just My Brain? Sharon Dirckx. A great length of a book, actually. Sort of the sub 40,000 word thing. The sort of that. I guess 120 pages. The sort of book that you can give to a friend who might be kind of interested in scientific issues like this, philosophical issues like this. And
she does say, I don't know if she didn't say in that bit, I think she said early on that she wanted to write a book that was kind of accessible.
Yeah.
That kind of thing, you know. So it's not a textbook in a sense. So, you know, I was going to say it's not scholarly. It is in the sense that she's clearly, knows her stuff. Yeah. But it's an accessible book for a layman.
No footnotes, and
basically it's the kind of book I like to read,
And pictures. There are definitely pictures here.
And can I colour them in?
Yes, you can. And every point that she makes is sort of backed up with a visual kind of hook to wrap your head around. So when she talks about artificial intelligence, for instance, I mean, that is an issue that really this book speaks to, because if you've got a mechanical view of consciousness, then you basically think our brains are computers. Therefore, a computer, if it's just got the right computing power, it will be just as conscious as you or I.
Sure.
And so therefore, it's going to be Terminator 2, it's going to be the rise of the machines. We're back in the 90s, people.
Come with me if you want to live.
Exactly, it's the gospel. Right there, it's the gospel. But your fear about artificial intelligence will be hugely increased if you think that all it takes to be conscious is enough computing power.
Because and that once computers reach that level of complexity... Yeah. Then they will be on a par with the human being. Yeah. Whereas, if not higher. Yeah. And they will therefore have agency, and they will therefore want to take control, and they won't want to take orders from people. And you have, the wars of whatever it was called, I think it was April 21st. 2016 or something. Wasn't that going to be the day of the Great War in Terminator? No, it was like 1997.
Oh, no, was it?
The machines, when Skynet went live.
Wow.
If you know when Skynet went live, write in the comments now.
Yeah, Jonah knows. We know that Jonah knows. So if you think that the brain is just a computer, then computers are going to become conscious. But she gives this great analogy called the Chinese room analogy, where imagine that you are in this sealed room and just little messages are passed to you, which are basically just Chinese characters. And you don't speak Chinese, but you match up the Chinese character against this wall chart that says, if it's that kind of squiggle, then you pass out this kind of Chinese character. And so you get passed in the Chinese character, you look up on the wall, you pick up that Chinese character, you put that in the output. And on the other side, the person who's passed in the Chinese character and receives back the other Chinese character might think that you understand Chinese. You know nothing about Chinese.
Yeah.
You're just very good at looking at symbols, and you get increasingly better at looking at symbols. And maybe after a while, you can fool native Chinese speakers into thinking that you speak Chinese. You've got absolutely no clue about what it is that you're doing. It's just you're looking at the syntax. You're not looking at the semantics. And so that's
So you're saying in the sense that you still don't understand what it means,
right?
But you could correctly write out stuff.
Yeah, you could correctly answer somebody's Chinese question with perfectly good Chinese coming out the other end. But it's not because you understand Chinese. It's only because you've got the rules that have been given to you, and you're just processing data. You're not understanding the meaning behind the data. Right. And that's what computers are doing.
Sure. Yep.
Even when it looks like, so the Turing test, the Alan Turing test, he was the guy who was the sort of the hero in the Imitation Game.
Yeah. Cumberbatch.
And didn't the Times call him the greatest man of the 20th century or something? because he basically sort of broke the Enigma code and helped, win the war. But he developed a little test for when we would know that kind of computing technology had attained some kind of consciousness is when it could fool a majority of people that they were talking to, a real person rather than a bot, Yeah. And, I don't know how many bots I am in conversation with. I went back and forth with a couple on Twitter today, and I did have to wonder. But, yeah.
Even I'm just a Russian plant.
It's all just circuitry behind the glasses. That's all it is. But that fear becomes multiplied when you think that all that the brain is, all that the human brain is computer software.
Yeah.
Just, cranked up to 11. So that's just an example of this book and the way that it gives like a really helpful analogy that you can sort of grasp hold of. And that kind of set my mind at rest about AI just for a bit. For a bit. I'm still stockpiling the baked beans.
Sure, yeah, you never know.
Digging the bunker, but,
It's a good interview, though. That was a few minutes of it, and it says 40-minute interview, and there's just loads of really good and helpful stuff in there, which is just pushing back against that idea of just everything being simply material and nothing else. Yeah. And there's lots of bits that came out of it, prayer as well as other things. So it's worth a look, that one.
Yeah.
I imagine will we release that as a podcast? Just the audio?
Yeah, should we do that?
We'll probably do that, because,
It beats this conversation.
Yeah.
So, let's talk about these 10 prayer killers, because the prayer killer number 1, do we have the image of the prayer killers? There it is, prayer killers. Prayer killers. We think that there's a mechanical world, right? We think that the world is a closed system that runs by itself. It just, the principle by which the world, runs along is inherent to the system. And so, why pray? You're just a gear in a machine.
So the world is just being wound up,
right?
Set going, even if you don't want to use that terminology of someone winding it up. The world is just rolling by, cause and effect. Yeah. You can't really do anything about it. No one can. So actually, what's the point in praying?
And so scientifically, that's kind of the view that we have. I think also, even kind of historically and politically and just news-wise, that's the way I think of the world. Because all the news that I hear about is not about the miraculous growth of the church around the world. All the news that I hear about is about secular powers kind of fighting against each other and who's going to win, and it's just a sort of a struggle for power, and that's a little bit mechanistic as well. So even when it comes to politics and everything else, I kind of am fed a constant diet of a mechanical world. And then if the world is kind of mechanical, then there's no place for thanksgiving because I get my daily bread not because there's a Father in heaven who's miraculously providing me with manna. I get my daily bread just because, I don't know, there's a lever and just the conveyor belt keeps going. And so, thanksgiving, drops out of my life. And petition drops out of my life. Just asking God for things because it just seems like the world is mechanical. And against that, I read Philippians chapter 4, verse 6. Rejoice in the Lord always. I will say it again, rejoice. Let your gentleness be evident to all. The Lord is near. And that's fascinating, isn't it? The Lord is near. We think that God is distant because the world is just a closed machine. But no, the Lord is near. So do not be anxious about anything, but in every situation by prayer and petition, with thanksgiving, present your requests to God. And the peace of God, which transcends all understanding, will guard your hearts and your minds in Christ Jesus. And always when I try to remember Philippians 4, verse 6, I always remember those two little words, with thanksgiving. And I think that is diagnosing a problem, that I think that it's a mechanical world. It's all just going to come to me anyway. And so I don't give thanks to a God who is at work and graciously providing for me just the way that he provided for the Israelites in the wilderness and gave them miraculous daily bread. So prayer killer number 1, it's a mechanical world. Not true. Not true.
And prayer killer number 2 is the idea that, we just have a mechanical God. And so, I suppose the first one, mechanical world, you would say if you had a non-religious, that could come out of a very non-religious view, I suppose, as well as our religious one. Maybe this one is more religious, that we would say, well, God is in control, he's got it all laid out, so if it's all kind of laid out, what's the point of praying? What's the point of praying to a God who has already kind of laid things out? Can we really change God's mind?
Right.
God knows whether he's going to heal this person or that person. He knows whether you will get that job or not get that job, whatever it might be. Go to that university. So
why pray?
Why pray?
Yeah.
And we were thinking about your father, Matthew 6:8. Your father knows what you need before you ask him. And that kind of makes you sit there and sometimes and go, well, why do you need to ask then?
Yeah.
If he knows.
Yeah.
It seems
it seems like Jesus is giving us a prayer killer there.
Yeah.
Your Father knows what you need.
It does, doesn't it? Yeah.
Your Father knows what you need before you ask. Therefore pray. What? No. Therefore don't bother praying, surely. But then, therefore pray, our Father.
Yeah.
Which is, not a mechanical God, and not a clockwork God, who's wound all things up, but a Father who is presiding over a household. And he knows what you need, so ask. So if he's a father and not a mechanic, then, yeah.
I wonder whether your father knows what you need before you ask him. Just wondering about, maybe that's not in the sense so much of, God does know what you're going to say, obviously, but it's not maybe coming at it from that angle so much, but like when you ask, God knows.
Yes.
When you ask for something, is that something you need or just something you want? And he is pleased to answer the things that he knows you need. Yeah. Rather than saying there's like a future knowledge that he has. But we're not denying he has a future knowledge. But maybe that's not the angle.
It's knowledge of us.
Yeah.
Not just knowledge of
just
future events.
Yeah.
He knows you, and he knows you as his child who has needs. Yeah, absolutely. So we think of a mechanical world, not true. We think of a mechanical God, not true. Then thirdly, this kind of mechanical prayer. It was interesting, a few podcasts ago, we spoke about a Pew Research survey in the States from, I think, 2017, and they asked a whole bunch of people, do you pray? And some people said yes, and some people said no. But then I think it was a majority of people who said they don't pray were then asked, do you talk to God?
Yeah.
And they said, oh yeah.
Yeah, all the time.
Yeah, talk to God, sure. Just don't pray. And like whatever that thing is when you're talking to God but you don't think you're praying, like probably do that. That's probably good praying if you think you're talking to God. Because so often we think of prayer as a routine, and routines can be good because we are distracted individuals, as we will see, but we can mistake the act of praying and having your quiet time with actually talking to God.
Or we feel that we're not praying unless we have that specific moment,
Yes.
So there are things that we do which are good practices, I suppose, in prayer, and the way we do prayer sometimes in church, or maybe the idea of the quiet time. Those might not necessarily always be bad things, but if you get into your mindset that this is what prayer is, and people, you've probably heard loads of times people say things like, "I had a really good prayer time." What does that mean? That they had a really good prayer time. What does a bad prayer time look like? Okay. If you're speaking to God, I just want to pull some of those things apart. I wonder whether we. I think was it when we were looking about this? You were saying when people say stuff like, "I really need to work on my prayer life."
Right. Yeah.
But again, like that's a separate thing. I don't know.
It's to thingify prayer, to make prayer itself into a thing. Whereas prayer is a description of what happens when you're talking to God. So it would be like when somebody says, I need to work on a communication problem that I have with my spouse. You'd be like, okay, I understand what you mean, but probably what you mean is you need to talk to your spouse, to work on a communication issue. is different to actually, talking. And we understand what people mean when they say, I'm working on a communication issue. But those are words to describe the communication itself. And I think so often we can get caught up in prayer as though it's the communication issue. And I need to improve my technique.
Yeah, I think it's easy to fall into this thing, isn't it? That, that prayer in the moment when you kind of just say like, Lord, help me.
Right.
Like off the cuff.
Yeah.
Maybe in your head in the middle of a situation. It feels like it's different to I've sat down with my Bible for 20, 30 minutes and had a real quiet, reverent, whatever it is.
Yes.
But really, if you're praying, you're praying,
Right. Right. Yeah. We'll get onto sort of praying continually and all that kind of stuff. Because, Spurgeon was once... It's one of those things where you wonder whether Spurgeon really said it or whether it's been attributed to Spurgeon after the fact. But he was asked, how long he prays for, and he said, about 20 minutes. He said, I wouldn't have thought that I pray for longer than 20 minutes, and the person was like really shocked. And then he said, but I wouldn't have thought that I go for longer than 20 minutes without praying.
Right. Yeah.
And it's like, so prayer is not mechanical, because God is not mechanical, the world is not mechanical, our minds are not mechanical. We have a consciousness, and this is why all these thoughts have sort of been prompted by this book. We have this consciousness, and we're in communion with the mind of God's, and that is what prayer is about, and it's this continual thing. So let's try and get away from mechanical world, mechanical God, mechanical prayer. And then what's number 4? What are we up to?
So number 4 is that butler God. So that's one of our prayer killers. The idea of God as just being a bit of a butler. So it's the sense that sometimes when we pray, we're almost just kind of saying, God, I'm doing this, and we're just asking for God to bless what we're already doing. So we're not really seeking God's will on things or anything like that. It's really just here's what I'm doing, please give me the rubber stamp, and off I go with my own plans. And I can feel good about my plans because now I've given them to the Lord.
But he better give them right back to me in exactly the form that I gave them to him.
So in the sense that, we're calling it prayer killers. That could start off in a sense that might kill your prayer eventually. That people might have that attitude to begin with, and then just think, well, at the end of the day, I'm just doing what I wanted to do anyway. So, well, again, why am I bothering doing this? Because all I'm doing is doing what I wanted to do.
But you're pretty sure your butler God might be able to help you.
Yeah, it'd be good to have the blessing of the of the deity, like
the divine butler, as we snap our fingers. It just reminds me of Proverbs 16. There's all sorts of stuff all throughout the Proverbs about this. The key verse in Proverbs, trust in the Lord with all your heart. Lean not on your own understanding, but in all your ways acknowledge Him, know Him, and He will direct your steps. In all your ways acknowledge Him. That's the main thing about prayer. Not making sure that God makes your path go the way that you want it to go. The real issue is knowing God. But in Proverbs 16, it says, to humans belong the plans of the heart, but from the Lord comes the proper answer of the tongue. Verse 2, all a person's ways seem pure to them, but motives are weighed by the Lord. Verse 3, commit to the Lord whatever you do, and He will establish your plans. I think that's interesting. I think we misunderstand that. It's like, commit to the Lord whatever you do, and He will establish your plans. We imagine that is, if we're sweet with God, He will make sure that our own desires happen. Whereas, actually, what you do is you put into God's hands whatever will happen, and He will establish your plans. He will do it. I think that's what it's saying. It's like you put into God's hands. Look, whatever you want to happen, Thy will be done, and then He will establish your plans. And then in verse 9 of Proverbs 16, in their hearts humans plan their course, but the Lord establishes their steps. So just a reminder that God is not there to rubber stamp our own desires, and that's not what prayer is about. So that's the 4th prayer killer, butler God. And then the 5th prayer killer, punitive God. This is the God who is just waiting to give it to us for our sins. And I honestly think one of the tricks that the devil pulls, he's got this twofold trick, and the first is to say, sin is nothing. It's it's fun. It's great. Just do it. It's a tiny little thing. God won't even mind. And then as soon as you do it, he's like, that is the unforgivable sin.
Yeah,
like,
you've gone too far now.
Oh dear. And and the way the devil whispers into my ear is the devil's always telling me that I'm only 2 weeks away from a proper relationship with God. Just 2 weeks of really, tightening up my walk with Christ and being sufficiently sorry, and and then at some point at the end of May, I'll be able to go back into God's presence.
Once you've tidied yourself up, prettified yourself. Yeah. I mean, I think it's. I guess I was thinking, what is it that kills the prayer? It's the guilt thing, isn't it? Yeah. It's just the feeling that you can't come to God in prayer because of X, Y, and Z. Yeah. And it's the line in Before the Throne of God Above, isn't it? When Satan tempts me to despair and tells me of the guilt within. That's what we're talking about here, I think, isn't it?
Yeah, totally.
That we feel such a sense of unworthiness. You think, oh, God wouldn't. How can I even show my face before God? That kind of thing. Right. I think. Yeah. It's probably the angle there.
And it's so interesting in the Lord's Prayer. You don't begin with "Forgive us our sins, as we forgive those who sin against us." You begin "Our Father." So your gaze is not on yourself to begin with.
And it's interesting. I've been reading Andrew Wilson's book "Spirit and Sacrament," and something that struck me is I'd never really thought about it. Was he was talking about the shape of a service and how it's he said it seems odd to start with confession because it sets the tone incorrectly about how we approach God. Right. And we should have it later on. But I was thinking so often in our kind of C of E liturgy, yes, confession is right near the start of the service, just almost like we've got to make ourselves right with God, and then we can do this thing. But when you think about the Lord's Prayer, like you say, you're starting with the relationship of father and child. Which is very different, isn't it? Yeah. Enter his gates with thanksgiving and his courts with praise.
And that's actually meant to shape the Anglican service. So, it's meant to be in the prayer book that there's the welcome and there's the adoration to begin with. But so often, and I think in particular in prayer, so often we just think, right, first things first.
We've got to wipe the slate clean first, so we can. So once
I've atoned for my act,
we've shown that we're penitent. And we've repented of our sin. Therefore, now we can come to God and maybe expect some blessing, or dare to ask Him. Yes. Now that the stuff has been wiped away. Yes.
Wretch that I am, and all that stuff's true at some point and needs to be acknowledged at some point. But it doesn't seem like it's the first thing on the mind of so many biblical prayers. So many biblical prayers come before their Father with great thanksgiving before they acknowledge their sin. This idea of a punitive God, that's utterly a prayer killer, no doubt about that. And then number 6, what's number 6?
Sergeant Major God. Yeah.
I don't know what everyone else's favourite prayer or favourite verse on prayer is, but
I just see on the comments we now know when it was that Skynet went live.
Oh yeah, Jonah Jacob.
August 29th,
1997.
I got the year right.
Yeah. Thing is, Jonah, he did not have to go Google that. He just knew.
Good man.
I don't know what other people's favourite verse on prayer is. I think mine might be Matthew 18 verse 3. Jesus says, "Unless you change and become like little children, you'll never enter the kingdom of heaven." And that always completely changes my attitude, because usually when I come to prayer, it's like I'm a weary soldier coming before a sergeant major God, and I'm reporting for duty, sort of thing. And Jesus says that's not the way you come. You come like a little child to your Father, who knows how to give good gifts to his children. And just so once again, just coming before Abba, Father. Again, before we talk about anything we've done wrong, and before we talk about anything we've done right. We don't come before the punitive God. We don't come before the Sergeant Major God. We come before our Father as little children. And again, that's working against the mechanical God and the mechanical world view of things. I mean, that is just wearisome, you know. But to come as a little child to a Father who gives good gifts, that will be a prayer enabler, a prayer giver of lifer. What's the opposite of a prayer killer? A prayer resurrector. Let's go with that.
Bertha.
Prayer Bertha.
Prayer Bertha.
Are you a Bertha? Yeah. Okay.
Great. And so there we go. What number was that? Number 6?
6. Yeah.
So number 7 is our distracted hearts. So just distractions of life. So, you know, we were saying another thing that kills prayer is just the feeling that we've got so much on that you've got to stop.
Yeah.
You know, we can't stop to do any prayer.
Yes.
Which, you know, we can probably overlap at some. That will overlap onto number 9 a little bit. I think about quiet time.
Yes.
Maybe because, you know, we have this idea of what we should be doing, what prayer should look like.
Yes.
But, you know, there is that feeling, isn't there, that, you know, you wake up in the morning, and I wake up in the morning, it's like, oh my word, the kids have got to go to school, we've got to get up, we've got to get out the house, we've got to get this ready, we've got to pack bags, we've got to yada yada yada, get off, you know, so on and so forth. And before you know it, the day is gone on other things.
Yeah. And it's about a world that is mechanical, or I often think of the idea of plate spinning. You know, I feel like my life is like plates that I've got to keep spinning.
Are you still on the sticks?
Have you got a machine?
No. So mine are just falling down.
Oh well. Okay, I need to become a plate crasher.
Yeah, just let it go.
Yeah, let it go.
They've gone.
Man, but I'm always struck therefore by John chapter 15 and Jesus saying, "You are the branches, I am the vine. Be fruitful in me." And that's just such a different vision for life, to connect to Jesus, to make your home in Jesus and his love, to let his words make their home in me. And then you become fruitful. And the thing about fruitfulness is multiplicatory. It is, you know, there's this exponential growth to fruitfulness that you could never really plan for. When it's mechanical, it's only addition. You can just add one thing on top of another. But to be fruitful is to multiply. But it's a totally different mindset. And it's not about spinning 100 different plates. It's about one thing is necessary. You know, talk about somebody who's distracted. You know, Martha in Luke chapter 10. Martha is distracted by much serving. Distracted. Yeah. And what does Jesus say? You know, Mary's chosen the better portion. You know, only one thing was needed. What's the one thing that was needed? Well, sit at Jesus' feet and learn from him. So in the midst of a whole world that's trying to distract you and pull you apart, a great verse, Psalm 86 verse 11. Lord, give me an undivided heart that I may fear your name. An undivided heart. I think there's a word for a social media world. Give me an undivided heart. And it's a chicken and egg thing, isn't it? Because our distractedness stops us from praying. But if we can learn to pray, it'll help with the distractedness too. Because we'll actually connect with something solid. Something actually life-giving, and therefore hopefully the tug of 1,000 distractions becomes that little bit less when you realize that you can just spend time sitting at the Lord's feet and connecting with him. Maybe that helps with your distracted heart. Number 8, here's another prayer killer. We think that prayer is a thing. I'm always thinking prayer is a thing that I need to work on. So it's like, again, like to use the marriage analogy, it would be like, I need to work on my communication skills with my wife, rather than I need to talk to her, you know?
Yeah.
I need to get better at the technique of prayer, rather than I just need to talk to Jesus, you know? And one of the ways that we, you know, think of prayer as a thing is, I don't know, I guess quiet times would be one thing, where we kind of, the sum total of my prayer life is, between 7 and 7:20 in the morning, on the end of my bed with my Bible open in my lap. That's the thing called prayer. And if I'm made guilty about my prayer life, that's the thing I think about.
Sure.
So I only feel guilty about between the hours of 7 a.m. and 7:20. When really my prayerlessness is a far deeper thing.
Sure.
Actually.
Yeah. I think, and like so, is the overlap with other things maybe that is that feeling of what prayer should look like. Yeah. That feeling of your quiet time in the morning of sequestered away from everything else.
Right.
That's when real prayer happens. And if you're not having that, then you're not really doing it right. And is that different to the prayer? It feels, doesn't it, like it's different to the prayer thrown up as you drive the car or whatnot, or as you just throw a quick prayer up in the air. I
mean, there is a time for
going into your room,
shutting your room, in the same way that there's a time to have a date night with your wife. Probably if your wife says you haven't taken me out in the last year, and you say, yeah, but I'm always asking you to pass the salt. She might have a point to that, at that point. But it's always making prayer into the thing that needs working on, rather than prayer as a name for this aspect of my walk with Jesus. Prayer as a thing by itself that you work on, as opposed to a description of your relationship with Jesus. That can be a prayer killer. And then number 9, prayer is pious. Did we settle on pious as number 9? Let's have a look.
Yes, we did.
Prayer is pious. And again, it becomes that spiritual barometer that tells me I'm a good Christian. I'm a good Christian today because I remember to have my quiet time.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then even that word, quiet time. Why is it a quiet time? Andrew Wilson, second shout out for today. We haven't even mentioned Jordan Peterson. But ding. 2-1 to Andrew Wilson, but he's always pointing back to George Muller, that great sort of Christian from
maker.
Bristol. Was it? Did he have anything to do with the yogurt?
I doubt it. I very much doubt it.
He had all the orphanages in Bristol, but he said his one great duty every day was to make sure his soul was happy in the Lord. To make my soul happy in the Lord. So Andrew Wilson has tried to get happy times rather than quiet times trending among Christians. I don't think he's been that successful.
Yeah.
Have you had your happy time today?
Yeah. So, where's Paul? He's just off having his happy time.
He's in his happy place. But, if that became how we referred to prayer, as opposed to my quiet time, then I think that would lead to a different kind of spirituality. And therefore, why do I pray? Well, I guess it's good to quiet my soul before the Lord. As opposed to, why do you pray? Because I want to be happy, because I enjoy Jesus and I like spending time with him. And just the idea of quiet time, I always go back to 1 Samuel 1, where Hannah is praying at the temple, praying for a child. And in 1 Samuel 1 verse 13, Hannah was praying in her heart, and her lips were moving, but her voice was not heard. Eli, the high priest, thought she was drunk. And I just think that's really interesting as a cultural expectation. When a Jew prays, they're meant to be praying out loud, right? Sure. It's not quiet at all.
Yeah.
And if you're just moving your lips and your voice isn't being heard, you're drunk. You must be drunk. Surely prayer is out loud. And then you go to Revelation 1, And, when it says blessed are all who read the words of this book, it's the word for reads aloud the words of this book. There's a blessing for reading your Bible aloud. So, we retreat into ourselves to have our quiet time. Silent prayer, silent reading. And in the Bible, it's meant to be, even if you're by yourself, you read out loud and you pray out loud. And I think, we've spoken about distractedness. One thing that absolutely helps me against a distracted mind when I'm praying is just speak it out. Say it out loud. The ability for your mind to drift at that point is massively reduced. If you don't necessarily have a quiet time, but a raucous, happy time. Glen's having his loud times. And then number 10, what's the 10th thing that stops us praying?
Prayer is powerless. I guess ultimately we don't actually think it will make any difference.
Yeah.
So why bother? I guess that's the thing that can stop people. Which I suppose ties in already with some of the ones we've talked about. The idea that either it's a mechanical world and it's just plodding along to the beat of the drum, or there's a mechanical God and he's doing what he wants to do regardless of what we do. I guess it kind of ties in with that a little bit, doesn't it?
Yeah. Yeah. Everything's going to happen already. Almost the least useful thing you could possibly do would be to pray. Remember someone saying, I haven't seen the film, but I think I'm remembering a Rico sermon where he talks about Clint Eastwood as a cowboy riding into town in Mexico, and there's a padre there, and the padre says to this gunslinging, Clint Eastwood, is there anything you can do? Is there anything I can do, Clint, to help save the day? And Clint Eastwood said, you could pray. And then he rides off into the distance, with that smirk, saying, what a useless thing you could possibly do. You could pray, ha ha ha. But according to
prayers and thoughts,
thoughts and prayers.
Thoughts and prayers on the internet, sending thoughts and prayers.
Thoughts and prayers. Yeah. What a useless thing to do. And then James 5 verse 16 says, the prayer of a righteous person is powerful and effective. Did you hear that? The prayer of a righteous person is powerful and effective. It actually gets stuff done in the world. And if God is a father who knows what you need before you ask, and if we are little children, and if this world is not a machine, but it is actually the household of our Father in heaven, then the most powerful and effective thing we can do is pray.
Yeah.
But it takes a real mentality shift, I guess. And I just wonder what you guys think. What are the big prayer killers for you? What are the big verses that help you to fight back against the prayer killers? Do keep the conversation going in the comments. We'd love to hear from you. Do you have any final thoughts on prayer? What's going to get us praying, Paul? What's going to get us?
Well, I think in the same vein of like when we say how do we get people evangelizing and sharing the gospel?
Yeah,
it has to be. It's really an overflow, isn't it, of something else? Like it comes from within. What I mean is that you can't just think, oh, my relationship with God isn't very good at the moment, therefore I can drum it back into existence by doing some good prayer. Whereas actually it's the knowing knowing you're in relationship, knowing who you are in Christ, and knowing that our Father part of that prayer that then brings it out naturally, I suppose, more so.
Yes.
Which is why we always, in lots of aspects of life, it's if you've got a sin in your life, or you want to be better at evangelism, or more passionate about evangelism, or you want to be a better prayer, it's always about going back to the gospel, isn't it?
Yes.
Like the gospel is the thing that teaches godliness, trains us for righteousness and all that stuff. It's always going back to the gospel that brings those changes and changes you from the inside out and stuff, rather than, I better just make sure I'm going to find 5 people today who I can share the gospel with. Yeah. Because I feel like I need to do this.
Yeah.
Rather than that's a very mechanical approach, isn't it?
Yes.
Rather than it just flowing naturally out of the relationship you already have. So
Yes.
I think prayer. I think prayer is in a similar thing, isn't it? That it has to flow out of something else.
Yeah. It's the chief exercise of faith. That's what Calvin said. The chief exercise of faith, which means it's the first thing that flows from your trust of Jesus. So yeah, if our prayer life is going awry, well, let's get back to faith. Let's get back to trusting Jesus. That in myself I have no right to come before a holy God, but in my great high priest, the Son of the Father has made me a child and filled me with the spirit of adoption, who cries out, Abba, Father. And now I just say Amen to Christ's perfect prayer, wrapped up in the love of God. Now pray. It is that organic overflow of the heart. So let's be praying. We said on a former podcast that one of the ways that our evangelism goes wrong is that we talk to people about God more than we talk to God about people. And I sincerely believe that the thing that will make our evangelism powerful and effective is prayer. So let's be returning to the Lord and coming in the name of Jesus to our great Father. So next week we are going to show an interview with Peter Leithart. I'm going to record that tomorrow. If you know who Peter Leithart is, he's fantastic. And if you don't know who he is, it'll be great to introduce.
He's still fantastic.
He's still fantastic. Just because he's not in your purvey.
It's not subjectively.
So if you do know who he is and you have a great question that you'd like me to ask him, I am asking him tomorrow, and I'll be interviewing him. And next Tuesday I won't be around. Paul might be, but we will think about what to do next week. But we will definitely have Peter Leithart next week, and the week after that we will actually have Rebecca McLaughlin, the author of Confronting Christianity, a terrific read, and she'll be answering 12 hard questions for the world's largest religion. So some great interviews. Sharon Dirckx, and then Peter Leithart, and then Rebecca McLaughlin.
Just keeps on coming.
We're spoiling you. So that'll do us for now. And stay tuned for the podcast on Friday.
Mm-hmm.
And until next week.
See you soon.
Bye-bye.
Take care. Bye.